Perfect.
So, hey, thanks so much again for being here. You know, this is a time in which a whole lot of people have got a whole lot of other demands for their time. And it's a privilege to have you here to learn more about the things that are and are not human trafficking within San Diego County and the things we can do about that. For those of you watching this on the recording, I'm David Oates. I have the privilege of chairing the Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force for District 5340 under the direction of District Governor Steve Whiteson. My fearless colleague, Danny Womack, who's here, who's led our charge on the workshop series. We've got a really good one for you. And so if you have any questions at all, we'll have contact information on the website where this will be posted. And certainly ask for any feedback you have about other things you want to see. But Danny, why don't you introduce our speaker?
I am so excited to have Leah with us. And to be able to introduce you, and you're in for a treat to be able to hear from her. So Leah is the executive director and founder of an organization called Grace, and she gets to work hands-on with the girls who have been exploited and the young people who are at risk, which means she has got an insight that is just unsurpassed. And the stories that you'll hear and the education that you'll get tonight will really help you be able to identify. It'll help you be able to understand. And I got to tell you, I really think that you're going to walk away with a much more complete picture of what trafficking is than you have right at this moment, because we have certain thoughts and things get sensationalized sometimes. And to see when the rubber meets the road, what it really looks like and what it really is for that the girls experience, how they and boys, how they end up getting involved, and what their experience is like is just incredible. And to hear from Leah, who is boots on the ground, working day in and day out with our young people, is just absolutely incredible. So Leah, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Give us just a minute here. I don't know why. Sorry, guys. Give us just a minute now.
We are all set. Go right away. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much for having me here this evening. I am discussing part 2, the perspective of the young people that get groomed and then trafficked. I'll be able to speak on my own personal experience of being groomed and exploited as a teenager, and then also from the experiences of the youth I currently work with. I am the founder and president of Girls Rising Above Child Exploitation, GRACE for short. And our mission is to support, empower, and provide services to victims of child exploitation and at-risk youth. We work here in San Diego, and we currently work with ages 12 to 21 who have been exploited, trafficked, and at risk of being trafficked. So, as we know, human trafficking is a growing issue. The National Human Trafficking Hotline statistics show, The National Human Trafficking Hotline statistics show a 25% jump in human trafficking cases from 2017 to 2018. And in 2018, the National Human Trafficking Hotline received more calls from California than any other state in the US. And in San Diego County alone, it was registered at an $810 million underground industry in a 2016 study. In the US, the average age of entry is between the ages of 12 and 14 years old. And studies consistently report that 50 to 90% of child sex trafficking victims have been involved in the child welfare system. So a lot of child trafficking happens through foster care. So So about child trafficking, which is the recruitment, coercion, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of children under the age of 18 for the purpose of exploitation. It is a violation of their rights and their well-being and denies them the opportunity to reach their full potential. A lot of what I'll be talking about is on child exploitation as well, which refers to the use of children for someone else's advantage, gratification, or profit, often resulting in unjust, cruel, and harmful treatment of the child. These activities are to the detriment of the child's physical or mental health, education, moral, or social emotional development. It covers situations of manipulation, misuse, abuse, victimization, oppression, or ill treatment. So basically, a child under the age of 18 cannot consent to sex. So before child trafficking, they used to just make it as human trafficking. But now they're starting to realize, oh, children, they're minors, they cannot consent. And so they've made a separate category of child trafficking, and they are excluded from the need for coercion or force or fraud. So if anybody's under the age of 18 and they are sold for sex or exploited, they are protected under the new laws. So how does it happen? It starts with the grooming process. Sexual grooming, or just grooming, is a preparatory process in which a predator gradually gains a person's trust with the intent to exploit them. The victim is usually a child, teen, or vulnerable adult. The purpose of grooming is to manipulate the person into becoming a co-operating participant in their own abuse or exploitation, which reduces the likelihood of a disclosure and increases the likelihood that the victim will become attached and repeatedly return to the perpetrator. So it's a mind game of manipulation, and they manipulate these children into believing that they're in control and that this is their choice. And so a lot of times they end up protecting their trafficker, and they don't even realize that the situation that they're in. Grooming typically happens in 6 stages. Stage 1 is targeting a victim. Traffickers target victims who have notable vulnerabilities that would make them susceptible to influence. So a lot of kids are vulnerable when they're online. They're on different apps on social media and their parents don't know about it. And if they're having a bad day, they may be hashtagging, I hate my mom, I hate my life, I want to run away, things like that. And traffickers are looking for this to see their vulnerable targets. Stage 2, gaining trust and information, gathering information about the victim through casual conversations with the victim or those around the victim. Traffickers are commonly a family member or a friend of the family. So traffickers don't have to be a stranger that they meet online. A lot of times they're even the youth peers. There's trafficking happening on virtually every single school campus in San Diego for middle school and high school. And so a lot of traffickers are their peers that are gaining trust by being in their friend group. The third stage is filling a need. Through the gathered information, traffickers are then able to fill a need in the victim's life, building dependence with the victim. This can look like buying gifts. So sometimes the girls will get purses or shoes and be able to show them to their friends and feel like they're empowered and they're being taken care of. Others are actually homeless youth on the streets that are having survival sex to pay for food and shelter and clothing. Stage 4 is the isolation phase. The trafficker creates time where they're alone with a victim, where they will then attempt to distance the victim from friends and family. It's a lot easier to manipulate a child when they're by themselves. Stage 5, the abuse begins. The trafficker begins to make demands and claims that they must be repaid for their time, gifts, dependence, etc. It can even begin with sexting and use of illicit images to threaten the victim with. So a lot of times they'll manipulate them through, sexual photos like, oh, I'm going to show this to your parents, or I'm going to publish this online. And it gets them to start following with other demands that they may have. Step 6, maintain control. The trafficker maintains control of victims through violence, fear tactics, threats, or blackmail. Even after having been recovered, many victims still show loyalty to their traffickers because of the nature and degree of manipulation they have experienced. They make threats on the family, they make threats on the victim. These victims are so full of shame, and a lot of times they don't feel worthy because of the manipulation they've been under with their traffickers. Stockholm syndrome is very real with victims of child trafficking, where they actually begin to protect their trafficker, thinking that that's the person who loves them. The reality of trafficking. We see so many scenarios on TV, people getting kidnapped, locked in cages. That does happen, but it's not the typical trafficking situation, especially here in the US. A lot of times the trafficking is happening within their own family. There's familial trafficking where the child is sold by their own parents, either to supply money to pay for the bills, or if the parent has a drug habit, a lot of times they will even sell their child to take care of their drug habit. Instead of being held captive in a cage, a lot of them are in a psychological prison. They are manipulated. They think that they don't have another option, that this is their only choice. And they get held captive by their own mental, just the mental state that they're in because of the way that the trafficker has manipulated them, and they've lost all their sense of worthiness. And that's why they go back time and time again. We see kids that, we rescue them and then they go back because they haven't had that proper time and treatment and therapy to help them understand that the situation that they were in is not what they thought it was. There are so many different situations. One of our youth, she ran away from home. She was a good student, a good kid, wanted to go to a party. Her friends were a little bit older. Her parents said no. And so she left their house and she went to a party. And at that party, she was drugged. And there was a group of young men that were going to rape her. And this man came in the room and saved her, and he became her savior, but he was actually the trafficker. So it was the ultimate form of manipulation. And to this day, she still thinks that this guy is her savior, and she doesn't understand the situation that she's in. So it's very manipulative. So here we have the teen power and control wheel, and we're able to use this to help our teens identify when they are in an abusive or dangerous situation. A lot of our kids have no idea that they're being trafficked or exploited. They're so oblivious to it. I know I was when I was younger. You think that this person loves you, that they're taking care of you. Your parents can even try to tell you differently, and you just, when you're a teenager, you think you know best. And so even one of our youth, she was 12 years old, and she was trafficked by a 13-year-old. And when I took her to the hospital, she's like, that's my boyfriend. We were going to Mexico. The other girls got to go to Mexico. I wanted to go to Mexico too. And they just don't have the capacity to understand that Mexico is not a good thing. And so we're able to use this wheel to help them identify different things that may be going on in their relationship that aren't okay, that could be red flags. And even if they don't identify with any of these at the time, they'll be able to go back to this and be like, okay, what are my deal breakers? If somebody, threatens me in this way, or if they isolate me in this way, or if they intimidate me in this way, these are deal breakers. And so they can be, in the know. If they're at risk, they can keep an eye out for those certain indicators to know that, oh, this relationship is not a healthy one. I should probably get out of this one. So we talked a little bit about trafficking on a whole and child trafficking, but more specifically, we want to talk about child trafficking here in California and in San Diego. So in San Diego, the average age of entry is only 16 years old. And in 2016, there's a safe harbor law passed that helps us to identify that these are actually children and that they're victims and not just prostitutes. So then after 2016, they developed the RISE Court to help those that were convicted before 2016 to get out of the system and get the proper rehabilitation that they need. And it's been really challenging to rehabilitate in California because we're not a lockdown state. So the kids are free to run away as they see fit. And there's a lot of lack of rehabilitation and safe housing. There's just not enough beds or rehabilitative programs for the amount of youth being trafficked here. The Safe Harbor Law of 2016 put that sex traffickers often target runaway and homeless youth, as well as children who have been abused or neglected. When minors are forced to engage in commercial sex, it places them at risk for prosecution under prostitution laws. Safe harbor laws ensure that trafficked children are treated as victims and not criminals, and provide access to medical care, safe housing, remedial education, and counseling services. So I know we talked about a lot about the problem, which can be a little bit deep and heavy, but there's also the solution. We're working on adding more rehabilitation and safe housing. We have a program coming up for host homes, and we've been working on awareness and education, teaching people how to use proper reporting, and ultimately we're going to work on ending demand. Some San Diego organizations that are doing incredible things. We have the San Diego Youth Services, SDYS. They have the iCare and STARS programs. So iCare works with ages 12 to 21 who are exploited and at risk, and STARS works for ages 12 to 24 who have been confirmed human trafficking victims. Generate Hope is a recovery home for adults, and Hidden Treasures is a recovery home for minors called Tiffany's Place. North County Lifeline has Project Life, and they offer a gamut of resources. And the CAST Collaborative is formed by multiple organizations, including City Hope, Women's Counseling International, Innocence Lost, and my organization, Grace. And we provide a continuum of care for victims of child trafficking and exploitation. Some programs for Grace. We have our Grace Creatives, which is our after-school program, and we provide therapeutic art and a safe place for the girls to connect and create. We have Grace Adventures, offering field trips, pro-social activities, and new experiences to our youth. Grace University helps with job and career and educational resources and connections. Grace Meals on Wheels, we offer home-cooked meals, grocery supplies, and delivery, and rides to and from programming. Our Grace Closet is a thrift store providing a free shopping experience of needed clothing, toiletries, and bedding, and school supplies to our youth. We also have emergency services to offer immediate care needs like food and shelter. We're currently working on a host home model, which is very exciting. There's just not enough beds to supply for all the youth there, and host home model is just not working, or the group home model is not working. When we put these youth in group homes, a lot of times they run away, and traffickers literally wait outside of group homes and homeless youth shelters to then re-traffic these youth. So we're working on equipping families to bring one youth into their home at a time. The families will be screened through the County Resource Family Program, which was the foster system, and they'll be given CSEC, which is Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children training, and trauma-informed care training. So they'll have a better understanding of the population that they're working with. And whenever these kids are acting out based on their trauma, the parents will actually know how to respond to that in a caring way. The youth will receive daily services through our after-school program with San Diego Youth Services and Grace. And the families will get to attend weekly support groups and be supported through the whole process by our program. We're also working on more awareness and education. So tonight I'll be able to talk to you about how to talk to your child about human trafficking risk. We'll be talking more about monitoring their phones and applications. And it's important to remember that their cell phone is a privilege, not a right. And so I highly suggest a phone docking station at night where you collect all of the phones and tablets and charge them at night, and you have the opportunity to go through them and keep them safe at night, and then they can have them back the next morning. If they try to use their alarm as an excuse, go ahead and buy them an old-fashioned alarm clock, and they won't have that excuse anymore. Speaking to your teen, you can tell them not to accept friend requests from people that they don't know on social media. Traffickers commonly use sites like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to lure their victims. Have them be aware of how traffickers recruit people and pay attention to their surroundings. Teach them not to reveal too much about themselves, their full name, address, school, or living situation to people that they don't know, whether on their social media sites or in person, no matter how friendly that person may be. Have them not agree to meet people that they don't know without first consulting a trusted adult, like a parent, teacher, or guidance counselor. If they feel uncomfortable or are hesitant about a situation, have them confide in an adult who can help them make the best choices. Making a decision to leave a situation or relationship where they feel unsafe or being harmed or threatened can be hard and scary. If possible, have them talk to someone that they trust, like a friend, family member, counselor, or youth worker. If they're in immediate danger or being physically harmed, have them call 911 for help. And if they are intending to run away from home, try to have them find a safe place to go or call the runaway switchboard. And if they suspect that themselves or a friend are at risk of trafficking, have them contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Child sex trafficking happens as simple as this. There's this picture of a phone where a trafficker is trying to get in touch with a youth. And it's so simple. Here's what they say. You are so gorgeous. I'm a photographer and can get you a job as a model. Are you a singer? If you come work with me, I can make you famous. Someone as beautiful as you should be rich. I can make sure you'll never have to worry about money again. A vulnerable teen will see this and be lured by it. They'll be excited by the possibilities. Oh, somebody's paying attention to me. They see potential in me. They think I'm beautiful. I can be a model. And that just starts the conversation. It's that simple. If a child has access to a cell phone, a trafficker has access to them. The riskiest apps and websites for you to be aware of. There are social apps and websites where random strangers can communicate with each other, such as Omegle and Chat Roulette, and it's important to be aware of. Yet mainstream apps such as Facebook or Instagram are equally infested with predators. Nowadays, almost every online platform offers anonymous chatting options, especially multiplayer games. The apps that have the worst track record at screening users include MeetMe, Bumble, LiveMe, Grindr, TikTok, Holla, Scout, Kick, Hot or Not, Snapchat, and Whisper. And I encourage all of you to take a look at some of these websites and applications and learn more about them and how they can be used to harm your child. One situation that I learned about in one of my trainings was on Chat Roulette, where a lot of kids will download this app and they just hit the Chat Roulette button and it'll bring up some random person anywhere in the world, not even just in this country, and they can talk to that person. And when they're done talking to that person, they press the button again and it brings up another person. It's called Chat Roulette. Well, there was a little girl that was on her Chat Roulette and an old man had shown up on the other side and he started talking to her and she's like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk to adults. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. And he's like, oh, just wait. Like, do you see this kitty? And like, he was petting this kitty. She's like, oh, I love the kitty. He's like, yes, you love the kitty, don't you? And he was like bringing her in with this kitty and he was like putting little clothes on the kitty and she's like growing this attachment to this kitty. And over time, after building this attachment, in just a few short minutes, he's like, now take off your clothes or I'll break the kitty's neck. And the girl's like, what? He's like, take off your clothes or I'll break the kitty's neck. And if you tell your parents, the kitty dies. And the girl doesn't want anything to happen to this kitty. She's already formed a bond to this kitty. And so she takes off her clothes and he's recording this. That child has now been exploited. It didn't even require that man to be in the same room as your child. That child has now been exploited. So it can happen just like that, so fast and just through a phone. There's a lot of hidden applications on phones. A lot of kids and teens know about these, and us adults and parents just don't know about them. Keep safe. Your kids can keep content and chats hidden from you. To get into your kids' apps, you'll need a password. Smart Hide Calculator on Androids and Calculator Percent on iPhones. These are sneaky disguise apps that look like completely innocent apps. These include ones that look like calculators and other innocent things, but they're hiding content from you. These innocent looking apps are really just covering up other apps, photos, and files they don't want you to see. So just be on the lookout for those and others. But there's a silver lining. There's also apps for monitoring your child's phone. They're called watchdog apps. Make sure you have a rock solid watchdog app loaded onto all your smartphones. Free apps like Screen Time let you control which sites they go to, which apps they use, and for how long. There are paid apps too, like My Mobile Watchdog. They'll show you texts and photos your kids are receiving and sending. You should also be in control of their password so that you can find apps that your kids are using. That way you can look in the App Store or Google Play to see what apps they've downloaded. And if you see something, say something. When we're out and about and we see a trafficking situation or a possible situation, it kind of makes us uncomfortable. It's like, ooh, what's happening to that kid or what's happening to that woman? And you're just not sure what to say. You can just look them in the eye and say, are you okay? Just look them in the eye. And if the answer is no, ask how you can help. Call 911 if the situation looks emergent. Call the human trafficking hotline to report an incident. And make sure to take notes of the things like their appearance, tone of an interaction. If they're in a vehicle, get the description and license plate. Note if there's any resistance and the location that they're at, and if they're driving, the direction of travel. Here is the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline. I'm going to leave this up for just a moment so that you can go ahead and take note of it. And please put this in your phones as a contact. You just don't want to run into that moment where you need to report something. You're like, oh, I wish I had that number handy. So go ahead and put this in your contacts on your phone. And I'm going to talk to you about one other situation. Trafficking happens so easily. Like, these kids get manipulated at all ages. And we had a situation that I learned about where this young woman was going off to college and her mom was a lawyer, her dad was a pastor. And when she was off at college, she was approached by a modeling agency at a mall and she was so excited. So she filled out all the documentation, the paperwork. They had her social, her current address, her permanent address, which was her parents' address, and it seemed legitimate. She did a couple modeling gigs, and after just a couple modeling gigs, she noticed that her boss was getting more aggressive with one of the girls, and she didn't like the way that he was treating the girl. So she went back to her dorm and was like, "Ooh, I need to like quit this job. I'm just gonna, say that I'm just too busy studying." So she called her boss and was like, "Listen, finals are coming up, getting really busy with school. I don't think I can do this job right now." And she heard him wrestling through some papers, and he was like, "Listen, I own you, B. Your mother's name is this. You're living here. Your parents live here." And he just started going off all of her paperwork. And he's like, "If you don't show up tonight, I'm going after your parents." So she showed up that night, and that was the night that she was sold into sexual slavery. And she was young. She was like a young adult, late teens, going off to college for the first time. And she had a great relationship with her parents. She was a good kid, smart, on scholarship. And it happened just that easily. It's so manipulative. And she stayed in that life for 2 years. And then before she reached the attention of the police, and then she went into working as an informant for the police. And after 2 years of that, it got dangerous for her. So they're going to put her into witness protection. So she got to go visit her parents one last time before going into witness protection. And she finally told her dad and her mom what had happened to her. And she finally came clean about everything. And so that night she went to bed knowing that she was going to be committing suicide the next day. And she says, "Thank God I'm not an early riser. My parents woke up before I did," because her parents greeted her with a pancake breakfast and let her know that she was so loved and so worthy. And there wasn't anything that she could do that would make them love her any less. And so that saved her life. But it can happen that quick to anybody. So ultimately, we need to stop the demand. That's the only way to end child sex trafficking. It's a simple economic concept of supply and demand. Remove the demand and there is no need for supply. Porn consumption and availability is a huge problem. It starts so young and it just desensitizes the consumer of porn, and they get in this fantasy world, and then they start like having all these fantasies of what their sex life could be like, and they're not getting it from their partner, and so then they go buy sex. A lot of times when they're buying sex, they're buying children, and they're fulfilling these fantasies that they've been watching on porn with these children. And it's a horrible cycle. So it's best to go ahead and educate and encourage young men and women, because women are consumers too, to go in a different direction. We need to speak correction and not shame. When we're shaming people, they're not going to listen to the other side of the story, which is the fact that this is a real human being. This is a child or even a young adult, and they have a life, and this is not consensual. This is not the life that they choose. This is a life that was forced upon them. And they can be a change. And to all the men out there that are feeling shame because it's like, "Oh my goodness, I've purchased sex before, I've watched porn." No shame. You are covered by God's grace. You are forgiven, and you can actually make the change and help save somebody else's life. So there is no shame in this. And there's lots of ways that you can help. One is getting informed. So coming to things like this, getting all the different trainings so that you can actually do step 2, which is spread awareness. And the more aware people are, whether that's to protect themselves, protect their children, or to stop the consumption of pornography and sex buying, awareness is huge. You can also become a volunteer if you feel more of a calling on your heart to get more involved. Volunteer at your local organizations, and you can also donate to organizations providing direct services. I always say it's best to donate to small local organizations that you know are doing the work, and because we need your money the most. This work is not easy and it's not cheap. It takes a lot of funds to do this work. So donate to your local organizations and be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. Is simply don't buy sex, and you'll be a part of the solution. And now we can get to any comments or questions.
Wow, to say that wasn't impactful in and of itself and information rich would be an understatement. Leah, thank you so much. And thanks for your courage and conviction from your own story to building a positive environment for so many other people. It's inspiring on its own. If you have a question and can do so, if you go to you click on the participants icon, you should see a menu to the right, and you'll be able to raise your virtual hand. A little blue hand will show up by your name, and it'll let me know that you have some questions. I have a ton of them, though, thanks to some of the other steering committee members, chief among them, Kimberly Schaefer. So let me start with let me start with that, and I'll start rattling some of these off. And certainly, if anybody else has questions, by all means, chime in. But you sort of alluded to this before, Leah, on how easy it is for a young person to be essentially manipulated into trafficking. But I guess what would be the biggest misconception some folks would have about children who are trafficked? Let's take it to the opposite side.
Sure. A lot of them think that it's the child's choice. And so people are like, oh, they chose that life. But a lot of times it's the lack of choice. And if you have this bad option and this bad option, is that really choice? So that's my biggest frustration. People who are like, oh, they chose that life. Well, a lot of them don't know that that's the life that they're choosing. They don't get to see the full picture at first.
That's fantastic. To that end, Mary Engels just put a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, but Mary, it's a great question because it talked about, to that end, in addition to talking about reducing and eliminating on the demand side, what are kind of programs that we can help reduce sort of the vulnerability among youth, the recognition that they're valued? I mean, obviously families are an anchor to that, but for those who need more or maybe don't have that support mechanism at home, what can we do?
Yeah, there's organizations. I mean, one is Danny's organization and our organization as well, where we work with at-risk youth too. So they identify at-risk youth and we get them into programming and healthy after-school programming so that they're not out getting into trouble after school, and kind of identifying risky behaviors early on and helping to divert those behaviors.
Thanks for the question, Mary. Along those lines, getting back to parents, one of the things you provided some really great information, and we'll have it obviously on the recording, so people will be able to freeze this and sort of take snapshots of your great presentation on some tips about monitoring children's digital online behavior, social media, phone, texting, that kind of stuff. But I know, at least secondhand, some parents are a little reticent to do that. It's sort of the idea, my kid's a good kid, not necessarily getting into trouble. I don't want to feel like, I'm being, this overprotective parent. What would you say to them who may be a little bit hesitant about getting into the business, of their kids' mobile device?
There's a lot of really good kids who get manipulated into trafficking situations. And the parent will tune into that if they see a stranger speaking to their child in a certain way, or even a friend luring their child, whereas the child themselves, they just don't understand that that's what's happening. It's so smooth, it's so quick. And so parents need to know that it's not just an invasion of their privacy, and it's not just, oh, my kid's a good kid and I don't need to check on them, they're not doing anything wrong. Your kid may not be doing anything wrong. But there are people who are out to manipulate them into the situation.
Great points. Thanks so much for that. You mentioned also that, there's pretty much groomers, exploiters, recruiters in every school in San Diego County. But does trafficking differ in various parts of San Diego County, North County, Central, Coastal, Inland? Or is it pretty much the same tactics, the same sort of techniques, and the same type of individuals that they're going after?
I mean, there's definitely areas that are more at risk, especially where there's more homeless teens or impoverished teens. COVID actually creates a huge risk because more teens are online and their parents are having to go back to work and they're not monitoring them as much. So there's definitely parts of the county that are more seedy areas than others. But it can really happen anywhere.
Thanks. Paulette, great question that you put on there about what are the awareness programs for school students, junior high, particularly junior high, high schools, PTAs getting involved. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so they're actually mandating training in schools. So we are still working on more programs because there's a lot of schools to get to, and students respond in different ways. So I know one of the programs, I believe it's out of Point Loma Nazarene University, and it's called the Know More program. And it's actually a theatrical program that they're putting on in schools and getting the youth involved. And so that's a great program. We are trying to get in on the schools as well so that there's follow-up in the school. So after they put on these assemblies and awareness, we'll be able to go in and do like some of our therapeutic crafts with the youth during their lunch breaks or after school That way, if they want to say something later on, they have more questions, they can come to us and we'll already be present on the school campus.
Well, yeah, just to let you know, also, we as a district are putting finishing touches, we hope, on a reverse global grant, monies that will be able to use DDF here in San Diego County that will help bring programs run by an organization called Three Strands Global. And it's teacher training for 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th grade teachers to be able to spot if one of their students is being targeted, being groomed, if you will, for human trafficking. The hope is also that they will be able to, once they figure out and sort of get a little more attuned to the dangers that their students are facing, will be able to make inroads for that nonprofit with some of their student-run peer level training into there. So we're hoping there's some multiplier effect there. We've had some experiences with that at various clubs and now taking it to the district level. We hope to get that online here by the first of next calendar year.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's very much needed. We're hoping it can be a model for other districts to emulate. I want to get back to a couple of other questions in sort of the beginning, which is, I talked about parents, sort of monitoring their kids on devices, and you talked through why they should do that even for the good kids because they're being targeted and they need the support. But what about parents turning in suspected traffickers to police? You mentioned about, see something, say something. What do parents need to do a little bit more, if anything, with regards to seeing something, saying something?
Yeah, it is challenging because there's a lot of conspiracy theories going around right now, and the human trafficking hotline gets bogged down with people saying like, oh, I heard that there's children being trafficked through cabinets on Wayfair. And it's like, that's not what we mean when we say report something to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. If you see a situation where, this man is reaching out to your child and asking these questions and trying to pull them away from your home, yes, report those types of things. It doesn't hurt to report, especially if it is of concern. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to happen. It puts out a red flag and allows an investigation to be started, but it doesn't mean that, we're convicting this person of child trafficking based off of this text message.
Appreciate that very much. Mary had another great question and was sort of dovetailed to a previous one there. You talked about some of the vulnerable student population, chief among them are foster youth. What programs are built to for building resilience for them, and what kind of things should we be aware of and potentially help?
Yeah, they're trying to switch out some of the stuff with the foster system. The foster system is so broken. I know that they're now referring to resource family training. It's a lot of training the parents and really cracking down on the families that are taking in foster youth, because there are some not so great people that have ill intentions out there that foster youth just to traffic them. So they make money off the county and then they make money off the youth themselves. So training for the youth would be great. Of course, like we said, we work with at-risk youth. And so a lot of our youth are in the foster system already and trying to keep them aware and set boundaries, but also coming down stronger on the regulations with the families. I think that's where our host home model will come into play, is that we have weekly check-ins with the families, with the support groups, and we have daily check-ins with the youth. So they're not going 2 years under the radar without any check-ins, and people have no idea what situation that they're in. Right.
Oh, great points. I appreciate that. I'm gonna wrap up my questions with more of a personal one, and please feel free to decline it or drop it. But you talk about your experience of being groomed and being trafficked yourself. I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about your experiences of sort of when, I think as I heard you, when you sort of recognized that you were being trafficked, and then what was the catalyst for you to be able to break away? Sure. And then I have a follow-up for that.
Yeah, my exploitation started when I was 17. I was actually a really good kid. I was way too smart for my own good, and one of those kids who thought I knew better than my own parents. So I actually moved out at 16 to start college at 16, and then I was surrounded by a lot of adults. And in order to support myself, I was working, getting paid under the table at a nightclub. And I just ran the front door, collected cash at the front door. It was great because I could go to school during the day and cheer. I was a college cheerleader. I was living a totally normal, life. And I was recruited out of that nightclub by one of the VIP patrons. And when you work at a nightclub, they train you to just please the VIPs, people with money. You take care of them. You do whatever they ask. And I had no idea the situation I was in. I thought this guy was very charming, and I was practically a homeless youth just trying to make ends meet and pay myself through college. And he offered me to stay in his penthouse. I was taking limos everywhere. My experience was very glamorous compared to the experiences that a lot of our youth go through. And unfortunately, I was involved in a lot of the recruitment of others, and I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea, like, I thought it was a great life. So when girls are like, oh, where'd you get that? How'd you get that? I'm like, oh, it's easy. You just go out with these guys. And being 17, 18, 19, those were the years I was involved. I was so oblivious to what was really going on. And I didn't know for years after. What got me out of my situation was actually I started having grand mal seizures. And I had experienced some sexual trauma just prior to that time. And that trauma triggered what are now considered trauma-induced seizures. And so whenever that trauma was re-triggered by a situation, I would start having a seizure. And so in a sense, my seizures actually saved my life because I was then discarded. But then being discarded from that situation really affected my worthiness, you know? So it was a bad cycle, and it took me years to recover. And eventually I, became a strong woman, thanks to God. I had a great awakening and changed my whole life around. I got clean, I got sober, and I got married, and I started, working and volunteering, got all the way through school. And I was actually attending a presentation at a church about child trafficking when it hit me that, oh my goodness, like, I always thought the child trafficking was a transporting of individuals from country to country. I didn't know what it actually included. And so understanding the grooming process and the luring process and the manipulation side of things. So after that, I went through some serious counseling. I called my sister, and she let me know that my ex-boyfriend actually got it deported for human trafficking. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And once I, was completely set free, I wanted to use my own freedom to help free others. And so that's when I started working as a victim advocate for a rescue organization. And in doing the rescues, I realized there just wasn't enough rehabilitative services. And that's when I started my own nonprofit to do the rehabilitation side.
I'm grateful that you would be willing to share that story. I think it drives home all the points that you made, and it's inspiring, as I mentioned beforehand, to get to meet you and to certainly hear what you have to say. Last question before I open it up for any final thoughts from anybody is, you talked about wanting to give back in a victim advocacy, but where did you come to a point where you said, you know what, I'm going to launch my own nonprofit for all of the trials and tribulations. I'm going to try to raise money. I'm going to try to do this. I'm now married. I got family, got other obligations. What was it that you said, yeah, let's go do that? What prompted that decision?
Yeah, it was actually the moment I discovered God's grace, and I was in a life group. I wasn't a believer at the time. I mean, I believed in God, but I didn't understand the concept of Jesus. And in this life group, they were talking about God's grace and that how you can be forgiven of your past and washed clean, and you don't have to be wrapped in that bondage of guilt and shame anymore. And that you can be completely forgiven and set free. You just have to accept it. And that just radically transformed my life. I was so full of guilt and shame. I held on to that for almost 10 years, and I couldn't share my story because I was too ashamed of it. And I couldn't help anybody because I couldn't even help myself. And so to be able to release that, and it was because of the discovery of God's grace. And I was like, oh, if I could start a program, I would want to call it Grace. And I was like, well, what could that stand for? And it came out Girls Rising Above Child Exploitation. I was like, well, what does exploitation mean? And I Googled it. I'm like, it fits. I'm supposed to do this. And yeah, my church got behind me and helped me launch this nonprofit. So I was already doing my MBA course, and I just added some nonprofit certifications to my MBA and just went ahead and started it.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. Any final questions from anybody else? Either you can just unmute yourself or raise your hand and put a question in the chat before we say goodbye to Leah. this has truly been a treat. I can't thank you enough. Danny sold it as we would not be disappointed, and I think she undersold it. This was absolutely fantastic. Leah, thanks so much for the time. Thanks for sharing your story, not only to us who are on this call, but also the several thousand Rotarians that will see this video when we post it on the website. Do keep in touch. Let us know we can help. We're going to be setting up some volunteer opportunities, and we'll look forward to doing so. Thanks again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
It's truly a pleasure. Danny, thank you again. We will be, just FYI, so Danny doesn't have to run around and do the screen. We're going to do these on a monthly basis for about the next 4 to 5 times. We got some great, exciting speakers going up there. We're going to do a more expanded job of promoting them, both on district social media, news bits, and other venues. We will ask other clubs to certainly broadcast this. These are obviously at no cost. The intent there is part of the Human Trafficking Task Force, which is to educate the more than 3,000 people of action here in San Diego and potentially other Rotarians around the world as to what human sex trafficking is not and what they can do about it. And we're well on our way. For now, thanks so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you soon.